Calaroga Shark Media.
Hey there, I'm Johnny Mac with your daily comedy news. The laughter, the lilt you hear in my voice is because Nikki Glaser did an interview, and guess what they asked Nikki Glaser about? That's right, Taylor Swift. The question at hand, did Taylor Swift influence your own sound? Intriguing. Kind of like asking Joe Piscopo if Bruce Springsteen influenced his comedy, but okay. Nikki said, without question. I think when I first started stand-up, I sounded exactly like my favorite stand-up, who was Sarah Silverman. I was obsessed with Sarah Silverman in a way that I am with Taylor Swift right now. I'm sorry, Sarah. That's really terrifying. Did Nikki follow you around the country, attending all your comedy shows and doing the jokes along with you? Sounds horrible. So when I first wrote my jokes, I was like, what would Sarah Silverman write? No matter how hard I tried not to think about Taylor Swift, there was no way I wasn't going to sound like her. Nikki's hoping to go to Taylor Swift's final show on December 8th. And says, I hope she doesn't add more shows because I can't go to the dates that they're predicting. I haven't fact-checked if they added more dates, and doesn't really matter, does it? If she does, I'll probably shed some tears. I just want to be there to see her wave as she says goodnight for the final time, to thank her for all she's given us, because it's been so much work for her. I just want to be there to wave at her as she sinks down to the recesses of that stage one last time. Let me jump in. I saw Taylor Swift last summer, played the heck out of her music, saw the concert, thought it was fantastic. But like Taylor showed up at the Chiefs game last week and I was like, can you just go away? And the Kelsey brothers, guys, tap the brakes. Well, maybe not tap the brakes, because I think the Kelsey brothers have about 10 minutes left before everybody's sick of them. So you might as well cash in now and be on every commercial and show up at every event. But that train's about to stop. I feel for the Kelseys. John, you're making friends today. I know. I can't. I just turned into Marc Maron. I just can't sit in the basement and not say what's popping into my brain. There's a microphone in front of me, you know? Nikki Glaser, what we do post-era is, listen to this. She's got to be doing a bit, right? Listen to this answer. I'm going to fly to cities to go to Taylor Swift sing-alongs, which I'd done before the Eras tour. I'm going to potentially start a Taylor Swift cover band that would either open my own shows on the road, or I would do it as an add-on, a little show when I'm on tour. I'm currently also getting really invested in football, or at least trying to. Yeah, because you got that gig with Amazon. I really find a lot of similarities between the way my boyfriend loves football and the way I love Taylor Swift. Maybe if I really find a way to love it, I can have this thing to look forward to every fall. Okay, moving on. Review spoke to Jim Jefferies. Jim had a sitcom in the works that got canceled when the pandemic happened. Did you hear about the pandemic? Yeah, everybody had to stay home for like a year. It was a thing. Look it up. It's a pretty interesting story. Jim said, it's hard to put your finger on what happened after the pandemic. It's hard to know what would have been and what could have been. But then on the other hand, without COVID, I might not have married my wife. So you don't know. Also, I think a little of that time off actually made me a better writer. So I had more time to write jokes and do the behind the work scenes of stand-up comedy rather than just the stuff people see. Jim gave up alcohol and switched over to weed and said, as soon as I walk off stage, I take an edible and then I get myself a little bit of something to eat and I go to bed. That's as much partying as I do these days. The days of cocaine and women are long behind me. I always had a couple of drinks before I went on stage, and a drink could hit you differently. Sometimes you couldn't feel it, sometimes you felt it too much. It was a bit of a balancing act, where now I don't drink at all before I go on stage. So I've got a clear mind. Maybe with the heckling, I was a little bit faster with the heckles when I was drunk, because you'd say the first thing that came to your mind, but I also said a lot of stupid stuff that could have gotten me in trouble. So I think I remember my shows a lot better. I think I'm a lot more polished than I've ever been. In Australia, he's hosting a game show called The 1% Club and says hosting a game show for a bloke like me is a pretty easy gig. It's not really lines to learn. You just got to talk to people. You just got to read a few questions. You just got to keep smiling. A lot of people gave me guff for hosting a game show, but here's the deal, man. I love game shows. I watch at least one game show a day, every day. I like the question and answer things. It keeps you engaged. Game shows for me are the last bit of television where you're not looking at your phone because you have to focus. So as a fan of game shows, I never thought I'd have the opportunity to host one because no one would ever see me that way, but I've loved every minute of it. Marc Maron, who I just turned into a couple minutes ago, spoke to the Phoenix New Times. They were curious if there's anything he won't talk about in his act. Maron said, nothing is really off limits. I sort of moved through my material from my own point of view and my own struggles and my own ideas, how to understand things. I've told jokes in my life that were wrong-minded. I've told jokes in my life that could be seen as controversial if I was a bigger voice on the scene. But for me, no, there's nothing off limits. You can talk about whatever you want, but you have to decide for yourself whether you want to shoulder the repercussions of what you're saying and whether it's worth saying. So really, whether or not there's anything I can or can't say or won't touch, it's not because of ideological principles. It's just about like, do I want to deal with that crap? Marc Maron, where do you think comedy's headed in the next 10 years? It seems female comics are on the rise. Maron said, look, it's always going to be the same. If somebody can find an audience, they'll play for them. And if more people get on board, then, they succeed at being in that level of comic. There's a lot of comics around. A lot of them are just okay and working their angle. It's a lot different business than what I started in. There's a lot of weird crowd work going on. But, Nikki Glaser's a huge comic now, and she earned it. Maria Bamford's a genius, and there's Kate Martin. Look, comedy's not going to go anywhere. It's just like the dominant paradigm. At any point in time, since everything is content and everything is based on likes and followers, the justification for what success is really has nothing to do with the creativity of the art of comedy. It's not like that changed much, but it's changed in terms of how one gets seen and popular. There's a lot of people that are terrible and extremely popular, but I don't know if that's ever been different. I think comedy will just keep plugging along. And like you said, there's a lot more women and a lot more diverse voices out there doing it. Whether they make it on the large radar, I don't know. But comedy's always been sort of a niche thing for a lot of people. Success is based on the number of followers and likes and crowd work and $100 million deals. But that's just the way capitalism works. And now everybody's just a cog in some sort of strange machine serving tech giants. It's just the way the world's going. Interesting question here. Will you ever have Matt Rife on the podcast? Nah, I'm not interested in talking to him. Really? Why not? Marc Maron, have you ever thought about retiring? I think about it all the time. I don't know. A lot of people say it's impossible to do, but look, I'm doing more acting and trying to figure out how that works for me, and stand-up keeps coming. It's still my primary source of creative enjoyment, but yeah, sure. I think about retiring a lot, but I don't know what that looks like. I don't know if I'll pull out entirely, because that's just a little weird. But I'm going to be shooting a movie next month. That'll kind of determine whether or not I'm cut out for the acting game in any big way, so we'll see what happens. Jim Breuer talked about warming up the crowd for Metallica. AL.com said that takes a lot of guts to go out there in front of metalheads waiting to hear their favorite band. How'd that happen? Now, Jim has been friends with Metallica for years. I was sitting at my desk one day, phone rings. Serious, this is John. Hello, this is James Hetfield. And it was actually James Hetfield. He was down, Jim Breuer didn't tell me that Hetfield was coming up to do the show, so I had to go down to the lobby and get Mr. Hetfield. Breuer said, when they asked me to do it, and all the time, I was like, this is amazing. And it was like, well, it's not really stand-up. What do you mean? Sort of just entertain the crowd before we come up, like maybe shoot off t-shirts and stuff like that. So they had all these different ideas. And when I say they, it was more their team. But I hunted Lars down. I said, what exactly do you visualize? And he put it on the line. He made it so simple. He said, Jim, you've been around us a long time. You're a huge fan. We had you on our 30-year anniversary shows. You interviewed us. You know the crowd better than anyone. Just give them a quote experience. And here's the most important thing is you don't have to be funny. Tell the stories where you've gone on vacations with us. Tell the stories how you and James went to Disney World with your kids. That actually happened. Tell the goofiest stories you know. I entirely leave that up to you. You're the creator. I'm not stepping on your art. You do what you got to do. And the minute he said that, changed my whole perspective on it. I'm a diehard Metallica fan. What would I want to see start a show if I don't have a band? Lars said, when we have someone, especially a band open for us, we want them to be the next biggest thing because our crowd is so diehard. They don't show up for the bands. It's a bummer for them. It's a bummer for us. So we're going to try this. And it worked really well. If I remember, the first thing I did was kind of come out and let everyone know that the first time I saw Metallica was in '86. And the fans were skeptical. But the more details I threw out, and I start uniting the crowd. Find me the oldest metalhead in the arena. The minute I came up with that concept, you realized everybody was in this together. Like, hey, I'm like you guys. The quicker we're done with this, the quicker we can get to Metallica. Are you in Chattanooga? Do you like comedy? The Lookout Comedy Festival features 30-plus comedians. It runs tonight through the 19th. Headliner is Laura Peak, A.J. Wilkerson, Drew Morgan, and Leclerc Andre. LCF organizer and local comedian Donnie Marsh said this year's festival will feature 11 shows over 4 days with some of the best rising and top headlining comics across the country. Chattanooga's comedy scene is long punched above its weight, and it's very easy to get great comics to visit here. If you can only make it to one show, I encourage comedy fans to follow these comics on social media beforehand and decide which one you'd most like to see. The festival is a labor of love for comedy in our local scene. Every comic at my level of experience does stand up at night as often as they can, stringing small tours together and promoting small gigs while juggling the other jobs and commitments. This festival wouldn't exist without the everyday grind of jobs that have nothing to do with the arts. It's a rewarding process, and it's an honor to bring these great performers to a city that's given me so much since I moved here in 2012. You can get a festival pass as well. LookoutComedyFestival.com. Vulture has their comedians you should and will know. One of them is Courtney Peruso. Worst show ever. About 10 years ago, my friend Casey put me on the lineup for his backyard show Super Tight in San Diego during Comic-Con. I really hadn't figured out how to perform on a lineup after being a Groundlings performer. And I was super nervous because a lot of cool people were there and I was intimidated by stand-ups. I went up after Brody Stevens, who crushed with a magician's assistant act where the premise is the magician didn't show up, so I'm just dancing around and smiling and pointing enthusiastically at things that aren't happening like an idiot, but for some reason my music stopped about 30 seconds in. So the intentionally awkward bit turned into an actually awkward bit, and everybody was kind of staring at me in silence like, okay. I wanted to puke and die. Brandon Wardell went on after me and lightly roasted me, and I had a pretty little grudge about it for a while, but in retrospect, he had no choice but to acknowledge my bomb to save the vibe of the show. We ended up working together a few years later, and we're actually good friends now. Love you, Brandon. What's your biggest financial hurdle? She says, what doesn't help is that my comedy involves self-producing shows that are full of costumes and props. And during the workshopping process, I often try out ideas that I quickly abandon, but in the moment, I'm like, I need to go buy 5 yards of blue fabric, 25 toy guitars, and a Marie Antoinette wig, and a $900 portable dance pole so I could try out my bad idea tonight. And then my bad idea doesn't work, and then I have all that stuff taking up space in my apartment. That's why I recommend becoming a stand-up, not a prop comic. Best comedy advice, worst comedy advice, the best. One time, years ago, I was feeling down about my prospects and was whining to my clown mentor about being old and broke and doomed, and he said, whatever, dude, you're a failed actress. Who gives a hoot? Just own it. It's cool. I cracked up and snapped out of it, and I'll never forget it. Worst advice was in 2008 when an acting teacher told me to get sideswept bangs. They weren't for me. And that is your comedy news for today. If you enjoy the program, tell a friend about it. They might like it too. If you would like the show without commercial interruption, if you're on Apple Podcasts, there's a banner there. Why don't you do the 30-day trial? Eventually, it'll be $5 a month to get this show and a bunch of others, including 5 good news stories that I also host. You get all that commercial free. There's a link in the show notes if you're not on Apple Podcasts, and I'll meet you back here tomorrow.